You're listening to the Scotiabank Market Points podcast. I'm your host, Greg White. Market Points is part of the Knowledge Capital series, a collection of audio, video, and written commentary from Scotiabank Global Banking and Markets leaders designed to provide you with timely insights and analysis. When Amazon entered the marketplace, it triggered a retail revolution. The convenience factor has quickly become a necessity for many consumers, and the lasting impact on consumer behavior will most certainly be significant. But right now, retail is reeling with an unprecedented retraction in sales, big-name bankruptcies, and mounting unemployment. On this episode of Market Points, Patricia Baker, Director of Retailing and Global Equity Research at Scotiabank, brings us up to speed with the current conditions and shares her thoughts on how shopping has changed forever. Hi, Patricia. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
It's my pleasure, Greg.
The U.S. retail numbers have just come out, so that's probably the best place to start. Can you break down those numbers for us?
The data that was released last week really points to the severe disruption that we've seen from COVID-19 on the retail sector. The month's figures showed the largest decline since the data started to be collected in 1992. Year on year, April 2020 compared to April 2019, overall retail sales were down 21.6%. But if we compare the April figures to the March figures, they were down 16.4% from the March levels on a month-on-month basis. Inside those numbers, there are some dramatic differences across sectors. The food and beverage category actually up 12% year on year, but did decline 13% on a month-to-month basis comparing to March, where we saw the big surge in grocery shopping. Clothing and accessories was hardest hit, down 89.3% year on year. Furniture stores down 66.5%. Broader general merchandise down 14.9%, and gasoline stations down 42.8%. This is a big disruption to consumer spend and a big disruption for retail. It makes the operating models very difficult when you have that level of decline. For retail, April 2020 is going to go down as a lost month. Now, in Canada, the latest data that we have is for February. The March data will be released on Friday. However, there's no reason to believe April trends in Canada will be any different to what we've seen in the U.S.
So, significant downturn in the retail numbers. Where did online shopping come in as a support system there to provide at least an uptick or an offset to those lower retail numbers?
Excellent question, Greg. Certainly, COVID-19 has acted as a huge catalyst to shift consumers to online shopping. And I'm sure that the companies that made the right technological investments over the course of the past several years and were positioned with an online platform were in a lot better position than those that didn't. And we have some data that's come out with the Q1 results, giving us an indication of where online numbers shifted, and they are very big numbers. Walmart indicated their online sales in Q1 were up 74%, Target up 141%, Costco sales were up, online sales were up 86% in April. And just moving here to Canada, looking at a few of the companies that have given us stats, Loblaw's online sales penetration tripled on the back of COVID-19. And we estimate that they're now running at about a 6% rate of online penetration. Metro indicated that their online sales have more than doubled. Canadian Tire on the general merchandise side, overall, including their three banners, Sport Chek, Marks, and Canadian Tire, their online sales surged 44%. But interesting story at the core Canadian Tire retail stores, where online sales were up 80%. So online's played a significant role here. However, for the most part, the increased online sales will not have been enough to offset fully offset the impact of the decline in bricks and mortar sales. And additionally, you have to recognize that such a big surge in online sales also brings, a dynamic to the P&L in the form of added costs.
Well, we know online shopping was certainly a game changer, and I think now we can pretty much call it a literal lifesaver. How impactful has Amazon's presence been in the current environment?
Well, I'd like to say that the first thing is that if there had not been an Amazon, it's quite likely that most of the retailers would not have been ready for this. Disruption makes good companies better. And I think that Amazon's rise as an online player across a broad number of categories, forced a lot of retailers to build their own online platforms and ensure that they would have the technology in place and the ability to serve the customer via omni-channel. So, when I talk about disruption making good companies better, I'll just use Canadian Tire as an example. If you look at the two other disruptors that we've seen in the retail sector. So a big disruptor in Canada was Walmart entering the market in 1994. And Walmart's move into the market really made up the game for the grocers and for Canadian Tire. And put them making the right investments, focusing on the consumer, and just made them better retailers. If we look at Target's move into Canada, even though they weren't successful and made a quick retreat, Target's entry forced Canadian Tire to step up its game in the home and housewares category, and permitted them to have important share gains, not only from Target's exit, but it left them very well positioned when Sears ultimately left the marketplace. So pre-Amazon, I would say they would not have been ready in 1999, and I like to emphasize the fact that disruption is not always bad. Disruption can actually improve a business model, and those are some examples of that.
Well, COVID-19 seems to have been an accelerant then for a lot of the disruption that was already happening in the sector. So I'm curious about how things looked coming into this in the first place.
If we go back to 2000, prior to 2020 and COVID-19, 2019 set a record for retail bankruptcies and store closures. There were 23 retail bankruptcies in the U.S. in 2019, up from 17 in 2018. There were 9,300 store closing in the U.S., and that was the biggest year ever, and was up 60% from the level seen in 2018. It's not a bold statement for me to make that we're going to exit 2020 with another record year of bankruptcies and a record year of store closures. To date, we've already seen Neiman Marcus, J.Crew, JCPenney, Aldo, and Reitmans here in Canada file for bankruptcy. That list is going to get a lot longer. We're going to have a much more consolidated industry eventually.
No grocers on that list, of course. The sales have been strong, as you had indicated off the top. The concern, I guess, in that side has been more supply. First, when consumers were making a run on the shelves, and then more recently, we seem to be facing a real supply concern, specifically in the food processing side. Where are we right now with that situation?
Where we are right now, certainly let's go back to the beginning where we had severe, we had shortages and a supply issue that really just revolved around stockpiling and had nothing to do with any actual real shortages. And we're over that period and things had stabilized. Most of the retailers worked very, very closely with their vendors to ensure that they got the supplies that they needed. Now, what you're referring to is what unfortunately has happened in meat processing plants where COVID cases have interfered with the slaughtering of and processing of meat. Now, right now we are in the midst of a shortage of beef and other proteins. We've seen the price of beef rise quite rapidly over the course of the past month, and retailers are actually starting to ration the number of items that people can purchase. We will get through this. It will take a little bit of time. I think some retailers are being quite creative about sourcing finding alternative sources for this product. But I was in a conversation yesterday with one retailer who indicated that they are anticipating a 30% increase in beef prices in the coming month. So we're definitely going to see inflation in that category, and it showed up yesterday in the CPI food at home numbers.
Speaking of food at home, then, I mean, the trend out of necessity has been more grocery shopping, more eating at home. Once things have sort of reopened on the restaurant side, are we all going to go flooding back, and this spike in groceries is temporary?
Well, it's simply my personal opinion, but I think rushing back is not something we're going to see until we get a vaccine. But that having been said, I do believe that consumers will exit the pandemic holding on to some of the habits they've developed while under lockdown. People have gotten used to cooking 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, discovered new habits like baking. We've heard all the anecdotal stories about that, and discovered that maybe they like to prepare meals. This is all going to be exacerbated by the fact that we're going to have a very severe economic slowdown. So, by definition, you would see less eating out and less eating away from home. So, some of some of the surge in grocery shopping, not at the current levels, but some of that will stick, because I think some of the habits that people develop under lockdown will continue, and I think there'll also be an economic impact, which will see people eating more at home, because that tends to be what happens in a more recessionary environment. Also, another point I want to make is the whole office-centric world that we've lived in pre-COVID-19. I think that will be significantly de-emphasized, and we're going to see people engaging in work from home at a much greater degree than we saw pre-COVID-19. And that will have impact too on driving habits. It will have an impact on public transportation. It'll have an impact on eating at home and eating out. And it also could impact the apparel sector.
So it sounds, in a post-COVID world, we're still going to be seeing some lasting change affecting retail and restaurants. And these are two areas that have seen significant unemployment. Is it fair to say then, and unfortunately, that several of these jobs may be lost forever?
Greg, broadly speaking, I think I'd have to say yes. I referenced earlier the expectation that 2020 would see record retail bankruptcies and record store closures. With the industry overall operating with fewer stores, there will be an impact on retail hires. However, it's probably worth mentioning that in the short to medium term, there's been a hiring spree in certain retail sectors, like the grocers, in order to meet the rise in significant rise in demand. Walmart has announced they are hiring 235,000 temporary workers. Loblaw here in Canada launched a website to recruit temporary workers. Metro sent out messages to former summer students and retirees, offering them jobs. They've been working with the government, asking for more flexibility for visa renewals for foreign workers, and also trying to up the hours for foreign students to 40 hours a week from 24. And they've also reached out to specific companies that have started layoffs. Empire, the parent company of Sobeys, have indicated they're looking to hire over 8,000 temporary workers, and they too have reached out to specific employers who have laid off employees like Cineplex and Freshie. We don't know in the long term how many of those jobs that we're calling temporary will stick around, but I just wanted to make sure that I highlighted that. But definitely, broadly speaking, some of these jobs won't come back.
So where do we go from here, Patricia? COVID has obviously had a massive impact on just the way we live our lives. How is retail going to change as a result of us going through this?
Well, that is the all-important question that everybody wishes they had the answer to. Retail will definitely change because consumer behavior will change and is changing. No one would argue that this pandemic will against this pandemic resulting in profound changes in not how we work, we shop, and we live. We're at the early stages of determining some of the changes in retail as various jurisdictions are putting in place plans to reopen, and we're seeing some of that. It's really very difficult to say what retail is really going to look like afterwards. I would say definitely what I referred to before, there are going to be far fewer retailers and far less bricks and mortar. There's going to be a lot more online. sanitization and social distancing efforts will likely remain. But this is a very fluid, dynamic situation, and retailers are learning new things every day as they try to reopen stores and try to see how the consumer will react. What will the consumer be comfortable with? When does the consumer fear go away? So I think what I would point out is that I think we'll see uh, a reshaping of retail going forward, permanent boost in e-commerce, contactless payments become even more important. I mentioned earlier curbside pickup. No one was really talking about that very much prior to this, and almost every retailer has adopted that. Technology is going to be becoming increasingly important, and companies are going to be very focused on boosting technology capabilities. As I said, I think we're going to see lasting behavioral change. It will be very interesting to watch and monitor this and see, where it does shape out and when consumers start to feel more comfortable. Supply chain is going to be something that all retailers are going to be looking at. I think consumers are going to be wanting to shop more locally and pay more attention to the provenance of where things come from. And I think we'll see supply chain diversification as a result of that. But exactly how it's going to look is pretty much anyone's guess. We know some of the things that are going to be there, but there's a lot of more learning that we need to see before we can determine what the new retail model will be.
Have you started to see any innovation specifically, I guess, in the brick and mortar side to accommodate for social distancing and our new way of doing things?
One interesting thing that I read about was a company in the Netherlands that developed a machine called the Clean Trolley, which think of it as a little car wash for shopping carts, where it could do 30 carts in 30 seconds. So there's, necessity is the mother of invention, and I think we're going to see a lot of innovation when we go forward. Aritzia put out a release yesterday to their customers, talking about what was going to be different when they reopened their stores. And one thing I thought was very interesting, and I had not heard this from anyone else before, is that they plan on having a dedicated nurse available to their customers, which is interesting. I would say stay tuned for innovation. I think if you think about the companies that quick decision making everybody's had to make through this unprecedented event, there's been a lot of brainstorming and solve problem solving going on inside companies, and I think that's probably going to foster an even better culture of innovation, which will help determine exactly where this all shakes out.
How will consumer behavior change going forward? Do you think that there's any retailers, for instance, that are already well prepared for the new normal?
Well, I think one thing that is going to come out of this is that consumers are going to be paying very much attention to how the retailers behaved during the pandemic, and will have an affinity for those that they felt treated the customers, but not only the customers, but their employees and their community properly. I guess I would say, one of the things that that was very interesting was just how quickly the grocers jumped on board and made the changes and really focused on what they needed to do to make their customers feel comfortable and to reassure the customers that the supply chain for food wasn't going to be disrupted. So I would say all of the grocers did a very good job there. I would point out that at the very beginning, it seemed that Empire or Sobeys got out in front and came up with a number of innovative things to do, and then we saw everybody else follow suit. But everybody behaved incredibly well and were very, very focused on doing whatever they needed to do to make sure the customers got their food and their essential items.
That was Patricia Baker, Director of Retailing and Global Equity Research at Scotiabank. You can find more thought-leading content from Scotiabank on our website at gbm.scotiabank.com, and you can also follow us on Twitter at ScotiabankGBM, as well as our LinkedIn showcase page under Scotiabank Global Banking and Markets. Please refer to our legal disclosures on our website. Thanks for listening.